Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. I hope you all are ready for a fabulous day. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I'm a mom. I'm a nana. I'm a significant other. I'm a wellness advocate, studying to be a personal trainer, all kinds of things, all kinds of irons in the fire. But wellness, the reason I started Wellness Wednesday is because I think that a lot of us find interesting ways to be well, and that there's a lot of things out there that we listen to over and over again, and we hear and are told over and over again. We don't necessarily always register, but if we hear it repeatedly, sometimes it takes that one time for it to click. And what I love about Wellness Wednesday is this forum allows us to share. I love it when you share your ideas in the comments. And just keep it, no politics, no negativity. And I love to learn. So if you ever have a topic that you'd like to see on Wellness Wednesday, please feel free to send me a message or drop a comment. If you're not sure where to start as far as research, I would be happy to look into that and see if I can get it in a future Wellness Wednesday. So with that said, if you're here, feel free to let me know you're here. And if you don't see this till afterwards, please hit hashtag replay in the comments. Good morning, Carla. Wellness is a broad topic, so we cover all kinds of things. This is the third part in a three-part series regarding bullying, and today we're talking about bullying in children. So the first time we talked about bullying in the workplace, professional, space. The second time we talked about relationship bullying, which was familial actual romantic relationships, families, friends. And today we're going to talk about what if it's your child that's being bullied? What if it's my kid? So this kind of, there's still a lot. We could go for days on bullying, but this is important, especially if you have children, grandchildren, neighbors, kids, nieces, nephews, whatever the case. So bullying can exist in many forms. It can be physical, pushing, punching, hitting. It can be verbal, name calling, or threats. It can be psychological or emotional when it comes to kids and teenagers, especially. Good morning, Danielle. And that includes spreading rumors or excluding someone from conversation or activity. So you'll hear a few of these things that are also similar to adult bullying. It's a lot easier, I think. I'm not really, that's just my opinion. It may be a lot easier to catch it if we know the signs and stop it. With children, especially in this day and age when there's so much more awareness about it, but surprisingly still not as much as you would think. Good morning, Anne. So the first step to dealing with bullies is knowing how to recognize when your child, good morning, Annette, was how to recognize when your child is being bullied. So 5 signs, actually there's more than 5 here. I put 5, but I've got more bullet points than 5. So here are some signs that your child is being bullied. Now, keep in mind that some of these things you may remember, if you're closer to my age, you may remember from, the Brain on Drugs commercials. Some of these signs are also signs of other things going on. The point is they are always signs to pay attention because they could mean that there's depression setting in. They could mean that there's drug use happening. In this case, they often mean that your child is being bullied. So number 1, if they're not going to the bathroom at school. A lot of bullies attack in the bathroom away from cameras and adults. They avoid unsupervised activities and areas where there's not adults to intervene, if you will, or run as a buffer. Now, I have a personal story here that may be a little bit too much information, but when I was younger, when I was in, I think 3rd, 4th grade, maybe it was 5th grade, I was bullied, not in the way, good morning, Beth, that a lot of kids are bullied now. Social media and a general lack of accountability has made it easier for these things to happen, and probably it seems to me, even as someone who was bullied as a child, that kids can be a little meaner these days, and I think it's because there's less filters and less responsibility pushed on the perpetrator, if you will. But that's a story for another day. Anyway, I struggled as a child with having a hard time going to the bathroom, and a young lady who frequently made my life miserable happened to be near the bathroom when I was in it. It was one of those classroom types where we shared with one other class. Cubby's bathroom, connected the two classrooms. And she was waiting to get in the bathroom, and I was having a difficult time, and we won't get into too much more detail than that, but I was making noise, kind of grunting, for lack of a better way to put it. And she proceeded to announce to the entire class and anybody else that would listen from that point forward that Donna couldn't go to the bathroom. So this was just one of many things that happened to me, but let me just tell you that it had a long-term effect on that particular thing for years and years and years, literally. Okay, but here, what we're really talking about is more of the fact that bullies do attack sometimes in the bathroom because it's unsupervised. I've heard recently that there are some schools that don't allow that adults, even administration, are not allowed to go in the bathrooms if there's a child in there because they're not allowed to be alone. And of course, it's illegal to have cameras in the bathrooms. So that opens a whole just can of worms of things that can go on in the bathroom. So if the child is not going to the bathroom at school, and they're avoiding unsupervised activities or areas where there's not adults, this may be a sign that your child is being bullied. Avoidance of social situations, sports, birthday parties, etc. That may be a sign if they don't want to go to those types of things, especially if they were before and it wasn't an issue, that may be a sign that they're being bullied. It can, again, also be a sign of other things, definitely something worth paying attention to. A drop in grades, same thing, signs of several things. A drop in grades is almost always a sign that something is going on. Noticeable injuries or damage to belongings. That is definitely a crystal clear sign. Some of these others may not be as obvious, may not be something you would pick up on as a parent or an adult in that child's life. But noticeable injuries or damage to belongings are always going to get attention. And this is especially important to several different things, but bullying is one of those. Because a lot of times, these are like the stereotypical bully where they're grabbing backpacks and ripping things and destroying things, to pick on the child. Loss of friends. A lot of times friends in the child's circle, they don't want to be bullied. So if they see a friend being bullied, they may separate themselves from that child, or from your child, or because they're not willing to stand up. They don't have the wherewithal to stand up. They don't want to be associated and start becoming a victim of bullying themselves. Remember that kids, when they're younger, they see things a lot differently. Their perspective's a lot different. Sometimes, unfortunately, those kids, if they're weak and they're not sure and there's a lot of peer pressure going on, they will join in the bullying. So these are situations where the loss of friends tends to happen. Either the child separates themselves from that friend because that friend has joined in, or the friends have started to separate them because the child is frequently getting picked on. Changes in personality. Either more emotional or more anxious than they've been before. A sudden change in personality like this, especially when they're younger, is often a sign that there's a problem. Again, bullying is what this is about, but these all can be signs of other things that are happening that merit paying attention to. Negative self-talk is a huge one. We talk about that a lot here on Wellness Wednesday in terms of how we talk to ourselves. Some children are naturally wired to be a little bit more introspective. I know that I was, and there may be things that have happened in the childhood that cause a little bit more negative self-talk or negative perception. But if this is something, again, that's starting suddenly or getting worse, then it definitely merits attention. It may be that they're parroting, especially if they're much younger, 5, 6, 7. It may be that they're parroting what they're hearing from somebody else. In fact, it's very likely that's what's happening. Physical symptoms, of course, stomach aches, headaches. A lot of times we as parents, grandparents, think it's our child's way of trying to get out of something. We may not be wrong. We're just not maybe looking at it quite the right way. Undue stress on a child can result in physical symptoms. And if they are using it as an excuse to avoid, it may be a situation or a person that they are, in fact, trying to avoid. Good morning, Beth. I don't know if I said that already. And then this is more specific to older kids as they get to an age where they have cell phones or social media platforms. If you see your child repeatedly getting upset or looking extra anxious or emotional after a text, a phone call, or emails, or being on social media, that may be a sign that the technological aspect has come into play here and that they're getting nasty or bullying messages either on social media or by phone, phone call, text, whatever. There's a lot of different ways that kids, especially teenagers, communicate, and bullying really does happen in that situation. So those are, like I said, more than 5 signs, several, and there are others, but these are the ones that stood out to me the most as some that wouldn't necessarily get a parent's attention, but a couple, of course, that are very, very obvious. And I have a plethora of pages that I used for this. So if you want more information on anything I'm saying today, definitely send me a message and I'll send you the links for the items that I looked at. All right. So how do we handle it, especially when it's our child? You may have a lot of ideas running through your head right now. And there's a lot of things that, as we became parents, we thought were a good idea or thought we might do in this situation. But you might be surprised at how many of those things that our gut reaction says to do are probably not the best way to slow it down or stop it. So, number 1, and again, there's a lot of ideas here too, but I chose the 7 that to me made the most sense and that I thought would apply in most situations. Listen without reaction. This is really important because the more you react physically, visibly, and in your tone and your facial expressions to what your child is telling you, your child may initially think, especially if they're younger, that you're mad at them or that they're in trouble if they keep talking to you. Okay. Remember, kids have a funny perspective. Even adults have a funny perspective. When I was witnessing a problem at one of my workplaces and wanted to kind of blow the whistle on it, I was terrified that somehow it would get turned into me that was doing it and I would lose my job. So remember that that is in fact a very childlike perspective. Children or adults were often afraid to speak up because we're afraid that we're going to somehow get in trouble for it. And kids, that's more frequent. So listen without reaction. Listen to what your child is telling you, and ask them carefully framed questions like, how does that make you feel? It's very important and it's very hard, y'all. It's just very hard, but very important to try to keep your visible and tone reaction to a minimum, your verbal reaction, so that you don't scare your child into thinking that they can't talk to you or that they're going to upset you or that they're going to be in trouble. Number 2, take your child's side. Back in my day, oftentimes parents would be like, well, what did you do to make them say that? What did you do to make them pick on you? It is really, really important that you take your child's side and that you make it very, very clear that this is not your child's fault. Again, there are carefully framed questions that you can ask. Some of the pages I looked at have some suggestions in that department. But take your child's side. Make them feel heard and understand and reassure them that they're not in trouble and that it's important and good that they brought this to your attention. And that they are a good person and they can do good things. So that's number 2. And then from there, you can coach your child on how to react. There's ways to do this. You can role play. You can give your child things to say. I have a couple of things here. Teach them to tell the bully how they feel in a firm and calm and determined voice. For example, and my screen just went to sleep. I feel angry when you call me names because I have a real name. I want you to start calling me by my name. Now, for a younger child, and sometimes even for an older child, this could be really difficult. But you can coach them on things like that to say you can teach them to try to disarm it with humor, like to laugh at the bully's threats and walk away. Bullies, just like with adults, in kids, they're picking on the one that they think they can get the most reaction out of or that they think is the weakest in the group. So the more you can coach your child on carrying themselves with confidence, confident body language, like walking with their head up and their eyes forward, just like we were taught, like as women, I was taught if I was going to be walking around, downtown or whatever by myself, that there was a certain way I should hold myself and a certain way I should walk to make me less apt to be attacked or approached. And that's eyes straight forward, head up, a little RBF, if you will, and a good confident stance with a quick pace. Those were ways that I was taught to carry myself to keep myself safe. And believe me, I have put myself in some precarious positions that it probably really helped me with. So these are things that you can coach your child on. Avoidance, of course, if they can avoid that person, then that's great. And again, the body language, the walking and carrying themselves with confidence. Number 4, find help, especially the sooner that you can get, if you sense that this is a real problem, don't just coach your child and wait it out. Find help, contact school administration, a resource officer, a guidance counselor. It's resting bitch face, Beth. It's just a common term used. A lot of us have this face when we're just in deep thought, not necessarily angry, but it sometimes makes us look kind of unapproachable. So that's today's term. That didn't have that term when I was a kid. I don't know about you. Obviously not, because you wouldn't have asked. But I do try not to swear when I'm on, but everybody knows the term. So there we go. But find a school administrator, resource officer, guidance counselor. You want to get, if this looks like it's becoming a problem, you want to get the people that can help when the child's not under your supervision involved and aware. And it's good to make sure your child gives it the name of what it is. Name the baby. It's bullying. That's what it is. It's okay to say. And schools are developing stronger and stronger policies on this. Whether or not some of them are being forced probably depends on the school and how much you as a parent work with the school as opposed to going at the school guns blazing about it, but come to the school looking for a solution and asking for them to help find a solution. Number 5, I think I already kind of covered this and a couple other things under the shake your child's side. Praise and help your child to feel good about themselves. Okay? Remind them of the good things they are and the good things they do. Don't base this on appearance. Some people, I know I love to tell my daughter she's beautiful, but yes, Danielle, that's fantastic advice. And this is what I'm talking about when it comes to sharing ideas. Danielle says, always have an electronic trail of reporting things, especially when children are involved. That's excellent advice. I'm a huge fan of CYA. I'm not really sure why I didn't have that on my list, but thank you so much. Yes, it is always good to have as much of that recorded, documented as possible, in case the problem does escalate. Praise your child, help them feel good about themselves, remind them of all the ways that they are good and important. That's not just attached to their looks, or necessarily their behavior, but things that they're good at, things that can empower them, things about them. Like my grandson has a huge heart. Just a huge heart. Now, he does a lot of things wrong, but he's 6. You know what I mean? He's still learning his space and how people react to things. But he has a huge heart. So that is something I would focus on in him in a situation like this. This is a good one. And I had never heard of this term before. And I have a page on it. Look for and point out to your child upstanders. And I'll explain that in a minute, so that they can copy that approach and teach your child to be an upstander. Now, what is that? This is a term I've never heard before I started researching this. A lot of times bystanders don't intervene or they join in, where a simple group, if 1 or 2 people were to stand up if they're witnessing bullying, a lot of times, and let it be known that that's not acceptable and that they are not going to stand by and let it happen. That is huge. And that can sometimes diffuse a bully really quick. And a lot of times they don't interject because even if they think bullying is wrong, because they may be afraid of retaliation and of becoming the target of the bullies, like we talked about with the lost friends. An upstander is someone who takes action when they witness bullying. even one person's support can make a huge difference. So if you can find upstanders and point out their behavior to the child, so that they can get ideas of how to handle situations like this, and even teach them to be an upstander. I have this website. This one I will drop in the comments. It's got a bystander video. I just thought this information was phenomenal. Questioning the bullying behavior, simple things like changing the subject or questioning the behavior can shift the focus. Use humor to redirect. Strengthen numbers. If like I said, 2 or 3 people intervene, and make it clear that they don't agree with what's happening, that tends to diffuse the situation. I remember a story like that from my childhood when we had a young man that was physically and I think mentally disabled. And I guess I had been picked on long enough that when I saw a few kids kind of starting to gang up on him a little bit, and he was in a wheelchair, I stepped in. I distinctly remember stepping up and saying, hey, leave him alone. That's not cool. And once I did that, 2 or 3 other people came behind me. So that can have a huge effect, Walking with the person who's a target of bullying to help diffuse potential interactions. Reaching out privately to check on them and let them know that you don't agree with it and that you care makes a huge difference. So there's this Be Someone's Hero video I will drop in the comments because this upstander thing is a new term to me and I think it's phenomenal. Physical threat is a crime. If it gets to the point where it's physical, it is a crime. And it means it's time to involve reinforcement. And that's where we go back to that documentation that Danielle talked about of all your reach outs or your reporting to the school administration, because when you have to get law enforcement involved, that documentation is going to become very, very important. So also make sure when you document that you try to keep the emotion out of it. I've talked about this a little bit before with the adult bullying. Try to keep the emotion out of it. It is much more plausible and much more believable if you just report the facts, just the facts, ma'am, or sir. So, and also keep in mind too, unfortunately, even in the school place, sometimes the bullies are the teachers. I hate to say that. And most teachers, I believe, are absolutely amazing and they're under a lot of pressure, and I get it. But there is the occasional teacher that just kind of puts a target on a child's back and frequently singles them out. And sometimes what can happen is, that of course isn't looked at as bullying, and that can sometimes, if that child's constantly being singled out by the teacher, that can sometimes encourage other students to do the same, if that makes sense. So, but when it becomes a physical threat, as soon as there is a physical threat, even if there's not physical altercation, as soon as there becomes a physical threat on the part of the bully, it's a crime, and it's time to involve law enforcement. So what are the things we don't do? And then I'll wrap this up because I know y'all have places to be and things to do, but this is such good information. It's hard to condense it down. Do not personalize it. And this is something I wouldn't have thought about, especially if you were a victim of childhood bullying or adult bullying. It is easy to take on that child's feelings, especially if it's your child, your grandchild, niece, nephew, whatever, especially if you experienced that as a child, to be like, oh no, not my child, to feel for them, to cry for them, to get angry for them. Do not personalize it. This is especially important in that first thing we talked about listening without reaction. If you are feeling some kind of way, and most parents will, try to hold on to that until the child is out of the room. Talk to your spouse, talk to a close family friend, get your feelings out away from the child, because this is a situation where your reaction and your emotion about it can strongly have an impact on how they react. And this is a time, in the case of bullying, to set an example. And it's hard to think that way when you are just absolutely angry or whatever that this is happening to your child. It's really hard to remember to keep yourself calm, because you are in fact setting an example for how your child will cope with any kind of adversity going forward. Number 2, don't retaliate. You can, and it is sometimes encouraged on some of these pages, to reach out to the parents of the bully. Again, not with guns blazing, not with fingers pointing, hey, you did this, your child. This is what's happening. How can we work together to resolve this? Is the attitude. If you feel like the parent of that bully is approachable. If not, then just stick with the getting help from the school administration. Number 3, and this one I feel very strongly about for several reasons. Do not, and I think most parents don't do this anymore, but in my day they did. Do not excuse the bullying behavior as jealousy or tell them that it's because they like you. Because that sets the tone going forward, especially they're picking on you because they like you. Raise your hand if that's something you heard as a child. That sets the tone for children to believe that that's how people show their affection, is by being mentally or emotionally or physically abusive. That turns into a lifelong problem that is very, very hard to get past. And just my opinion, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a licensed counselor yet. Danielle, thank you for being vulnerable and doing that. Because I know I heard a lot of that. I'm not a licensed counselor yet, but I can tell you from personal experience that particular term at the time, when, of course, when I was a child, I was like, cool, that means they like me. As I got older, I frequently found myself in abusive relationships, probably largely because of that mentality. Not just because of that mentality. I would never blame everything on that one thing. There were several things that it took me some time to work through, but this one is particularly important. And it would be yes, Beth, it is very destructive. And it would be my bet, just from what I have seen and heard, that a lot of women that find themselves in abusive relationships at some point in time heard this particular phrase. Again, I would never blame finding yourself in an abusive relationship just on that one thing, but it is something that can set the tone for a mindset that can be very destructive. And number 4, when you see bullying behavior and your child comes to you, don't just assume it's going to work itself out. This is another thing that back in my day, parents, adults that surrounded you, it was often ignore it, it'll go away, or they just assumed that it was a kid thing that would eventually resolve itself. And especially in this day and age, as less and less accountability has been placed on people that are perpetrating this behavior, and with the advent of the technological ways that children can reach each other that they didn't have before, the assumption that it'll work itself out, it's less likely to happen now than it ever has been before. So, that's all for today. Like I said, there's a lot of information. There's a lot more that I could share, but these are some basic things to just kind of get it on your radar. Even if you're an adult and you're walking around a park and you see something like this happening, and you feel that you can do so safely, please step in. Please be an upstander. I love that term. I'm going to be talking about that some more. But if you found this helpful, please share it. If there's somebody you need to share it with that you don't feel comfortable tagging them in the comments, because it may be a personal situation, share it to their messenger. It gives you that option when you click the share button, that you can share it to their messenger so that nobody else can see you shared it to them. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please share. If you have other ideas or information you would like to share on this topic, drop it in the comments. If you have questions, you want some of these links, message me. I will drop the Upstander link in the comments. And as always, if you have anything you'd like to see covered in the future, please feel free to reach out to me. And I will see you all next Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. Be well. Thank you so much. Have a great day.